Unit 1, Week 1, A Fresh Idea. This story uses tons of this week's vocabulary. Make sure you pay attention to the way the words are used in this story. Good morning, readers. This is Miss Kluczewski with your morning reading lesson. The story that we will read today is called A Fresh Idea. Notice the essential question at the bottom of the page. It says, how do we get things we need? Read about how one girl meets a need in her neighborhood. Follow along as I read this story. Get ready. One bright Saturday morning, Molly and her mom walked around the neighborhood. That is, her mom walked and Molly ran, skipped, jumped over puddles, and visited the neighbors' dogs. Molly paused to look at the budding trees on her block. I can't wait until summer, she said, especially for Mrs. Fair's great tomatoes at her market stand, she pointed. Molly's mom stood looking at the empty lot where the market set up every summer weekend. She looked at Molly. Honey, Mrs. Fair told me last week that she had to close her stand. She's really getting too old to run it anymore. Molly turned, stared, and put her hands on her hips. But Mrs. Fair's stand can't close, she said. It's the only place in the neighborhood we can buy fresh, delicious tomatoes. Then she added, to show she wasn't being selfish, everyone needs fruits and vegetables for a healthy diet. After they got home, Molly headed out to her backyard swing to think. If only I could plant a garden, she thought. But our yard is way too small. Just then she noticed her neighbor, Mr. Taylor, looking at his daffodils. Molly knew he was thinking about how he had planted those flowers with his wife. This was the first spring since his wife had died, and Molly saw the sadness on his face. Then she had an idea. Molly cleared her throat, and Mr. Taylor looked up. Molly decided to walk over to the fence. Hi, Mr. Taylor, she said. He waved and turned away. Wait, Molly cried, taking a risk. Until she still felt brave, she rushed to gather her thoughts. Mr. Taylor, Mrs. Fair isn't doing her tomato stand anymore because she's getting old. So I'd like to grow tomatoes. I don't want to get in the way of your flowers, though. I mean, I really like tomatoes. Suddenly, Mr. Taylor smiled. Molly, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but you've made me smile. Reasons to smile have been scarce lately. What do you want to do? As Mr. Taylor listened, an idea came to him. I still need a place to plant my flowers, but there's room for tomatoes. How about I make you a loan? I'll let you use a plot of land in my yard. I'll help you, and when your garden starts to prosper, you can repay me with a few tomatoes. Molly and Mr. Taylor shook hands on this deal, but first, Mr. Taylor said, you'll have to make an investment by buying some tomato plants at the nursery. Molly thought, well, I have some savings from my allowance, and I was saving to buy a computer game. She paused. But I'd rather have the tomatoes, so let's start right away. The next day, Molly bought all the tomato plants she could afford. Mr. Taylor taught Molly how to prepare the soil and place the plants. Finally, Molly placed stakes in the ground to help hold the plants up. Mr. Taylor explained. Once the tomatoes came, the heavy fruit makes the branches bend. Then, all they could do was water, pull weeds, and wait. When the fruit ripened, There were more juicy red tomatoes than even Molly could have imagined. There is no way I can eat all of these, she realized. On Saturday, Molly and Mr. Taylor carried several crates of ripe tomatoes to the market. And by the day's end, they had sold them all. Not only did I get back the money I invested, said Molly, but I also made a profit of $20. Mr. Taylor said, "Those are also your wages. You've earned that money." Molly beamed and said, "Mr. Taylor, maybe you could sell some of your flowers, and we could run a market stand together." Mr. Taylor, picturing a garden of zinnias and marigolds, was already looking forward to the next summer. How did Molly and Mr. Taylor each get something they needed? How has someone helped you get something you needed?